This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
Feeling sluggish,
fatigue,
I couldn't sleep more than 4 or 5 hours,
brain fog,
depression,
my moods were sort of all over the place,
irregular periods, I put on weight, major sinus issues, skin issues. I had 2/3 of my eyebrows, my hair fell out in great lumps.
So many things that affected my life for so long that I didn't actually realise that they were symptoms anymore.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? In Season 2 of The Shift, we explore the intricate world of women's health and help you discover how to balance your hormones and understand yourself better so that you can truly thrive.
The menstrual cycle is a vital sign of female well-being.
My mum just used to say, "Oh, Nan, I'm so sorry. It's part of being a woman."
I would like a call to arms for women to know that their intuition isn't lying to them.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. These are all symptoms of hypothyroidism. 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with a thyroid condition in their lifetime. And it's also estimated that 60% of women with thyroid issues go undiagnosed. This adds up to many women that are impacted by thyroid dysfunction, which, as we will explain, can severely impact your quality of life. Your thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland that is located in the middle of the front of your neck. It is part of your endocrine system, and its job is to manufacture and release thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones are regulators in your body. Your thyroid has the job of turning things up and down, making them go faster or slower. You have thyroid hormone receptors in just about every cell in your body. Your thyroid can help to increase or slow down metabolism. It can increase or decrease skin turnover. It can speed up or slow down digestion, increase or decrease bone turnover, speed up or slow down your heart rate, and it can increase or decrease your body temperature. As you can see, the thyroid's important for so many vital functions of the body. So it's no wonder that when it's not in balance, we feel awful. Your thyroid can be functioning too high, which leads to hyperthyroidism, or can be underfunctioning, which leads to hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism, or low thyroid function, is the more common issue and can be caused by several factors that we're going to explore in this episode. At Shift, we work with women with thyroid conditions every single day, and there are a few things that we know about the thyroid that we're going to explore with our experts in this episode. First of all, thyroid conditions are on the rise. Second, autoimmune thyroiditis, or Hashimoto's disease, is one of the biggest issues that occur in women. Thirdly, most women with thyroid issues fall between the cracks, being subclinical, so their blood tests are in range, but they're still experiencing symptoms. And lastly, that thyroid conditions are secondary, so using thyroid medication may help, but it doesn't actually address the root cause of the issue. Let's begin with talking about thyroid testing, because I know that there are a lot of you that have been told that you're in range or normal, but you don't feel that way. Let's see what Dr. Libby Weaver, nutritional biochemist, has to say about this.
I am a big fan of looking for patterns in blood tests. So, for example, we don't tend to have blood tests when we feel fantastic. We have blood tests when we feel like something's not okay. But if we were to have blood tests when we felt fantastic, so let's say we were at our absolute best level of health in our life when we were 26 years old, and let's say then your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone, was at 1. So the normal range, certainly down under, in most down under labs, it's usually about 0.4 to 4. Now, we've got to have normal ranges because it would be chaotic without them. But for me, they've always been a guide. I listen to the body, I listen to the symptoms, and then I'll look at the bloods in comparison to what the person's experiencing. So let's say at 26, when you were at your best level of health, your TSH was 1. And now you're 46 and your TSH is 3. It's still in the normal range. It's still between 0.4 and 4, but you're now making 3 times the amount of TSH you did when you were 26. So then if you look at your T4 levels, so T4 is one of the hormones the thyroid makes. T4 is inactive thyroid hormone. and T4 is converted into T3, and T3 is the active thyroid hormone. So if you then look at the T4 levels in someone, and the normal range roughly in down under pathology labs is 10 to 20. So perhaps when you were 26 and you made 1 unit of TSH, your T4 was 15, so right in the middle of that normal range. But now you're 46 and your TSH is 3, but your T4 levels are 11 and the normal range is 10 to 20. So you're only just inside the normal range. So your body, your pituitary, makes TSH and it's having to make 3 times the amount of TSH it did 20 years ago, and it will only give you 11 measly units of T4 for all of that effort. When you were 26, you got 15 units out of just 1 unit of TSH. So that's a bit of biochemistry, but it shows you how our blood tests can be skewed to one end of the normal range, but still in the normal range, but it's not normal for you because your normal was a TSH of 1 and a T4 of 15. So that's why I'm passionate about treating the body, about treating the individual, about treating the symptoms rather than what the blood tests are saying, because it's just so common for women to hear that, oh, I did all these tests and everything was normal. So that's great because that means it's likely that you don't have any kind of disease, but you feel nothing but normal. So let's look at what's just not working efficiently anymore, like that thyroid example I just gave.
This is a big one for our clients at Shift, and I want to take a moment to explain the hormones of the thyroid, the nutrients involved, and why just testing for TSH won't help you get to the bottom of your issues. This is the way that our naturopaths approach thyroid testing, and I hope that it helps you to look further into your thyroid health too. When you get a general thyroid test from a doctor, the gold standard is TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone helps you to stimulate your thyroid to produce more hormones. When thyroid hormone levels are low, your body will produce more TSH to try and get the system working. That means the higher your TSH, the lower your thyroid function. Lab ranges can vary, but generally the range for TSH is 0.05 to 4. This means that if you are 3.9, it is considered normal, and that if you're 0.05, you're considered normal. However, in range does not mean optimal. For example, we know from research that having a TSH above 2 can increase your risk of miscarriage. So there are implications when we're not in the optimum range. Then you have your actual thyroid hormones, T4 and T3. Most of your T4 is made in the follicles of your thyroid gland. T4 is an inactive form of thyroid hormone, and it will need to be converted to T3, the hormone that is active at the tissue level. Only 10% of your T3 is made in your thyroid gland. The rest is converted from T4 in your peripheral tissues, especially the liver and the kidneys. It is worth noting that the medication thyroxine, also called utroxig or levothyroxine, is a synthetic form of T4. That means your body needs to convert it to T3 to be properly utilised in the tissues. I'll explain how this works in a moment. So you have TSH, which will be high when your thyroid hormones are low, T4, which converts into T3, and then you also have a hormone called reverse T3. This is the one that most of you would not have had tested, as it's largely ignored by mainstream medicine at this stage. It is so important for thyroid hormone levels to stay steady in the body that your body has many steps in place to stop huge swings in levels. As well as T4 needing to convert to T3 to be utilised, your body will upregulate the production of reverse T3 in a bid to keep things in balance also. Your body will convert a small amount of T4 into reverse T3 in normal circumstances. But during perceived times of starvation, stress or illness, your body will convert more T4 into reverse T3 in a bid to preserve energy. This downregulates thyroid function and slows metabolism, which if you're experiencing illness or trauma is a great thing, as you'll need to store more fat and preserve your energy for healing. By testing your reverse T3, you get a clearer picture of what is happening with the thyroid. High levels can indicate that you need to work on your stress, or that liver function may be impacted. And these are certainly areas that our naturopaths would be looking into at Shift. I'll explore more about what to look for later on, but I want to take a look at some other factors that can influence our thyroid indirectly. Let's see what Dr. Vincent Pedre, integrative doctor, has to say about it.
several different things. So let's expand on what we mean by when we're talking about gut. Let's say the gut is not just the digestive system. So the esophagus, stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, that's what most people think of. But let's think of it as a whole system. And a key important part of that system is the liver. And then another key component of this system is the gut microbiome. So together, they help in processing out hormone metabolites and balancing out our hormones, and the gut microbiome is integrally involved with that because it can also metabolize our own hormones. In fact, I'm sure a lot of listeners have either know somebody or themselves have suffered from a thyroid condition. The most common one is hypothyroidism due to autoimmune thyroid, called hashimoto's. And in order to have your healthy thyroid function, you need to convert the primary thyroid hormone produced by the thyroid, which is T4, into T3. And most of that is actually done in the periphery. So the thyroid mostly produces T4, which is more like a precursor hormone. It's not the hormone that has the strongest effect that we attribute to thyroid hormone, like regulating metabolism inside the cells. That is due to T3. And in order to get T3, you have to convert T4 to T3. The thyroid is producing about 93% of the T4 in the body. Very small amount of T3. So then the T4 gets converted to T3 in different places. One of them is the liver. About 60% of the T4 gets converted to T3, and 20% gets converted at the cellular level. So at the destination tissues, it gets converted to T3. But coincidentally, the other 20% is actually converted by the gut microbiome inside the digestive tract, and it's converted to T3 and then reabsorbed into the body as an active form of thyroid hormone. So that's one example of how the gut ecosystem is connected to hormones. The other really important example is how hormones are processed out. So for example, estrogen needs to be metabolized once it's served its purpose. So it gets metabolized and moved out of the body, and it gets moved out through the bile. And in order to do that, it needs to get anchored by phase 2 detox enzymes that basically tie an anchor to the estrogen so it can't come back into the body. And then it gets excreted in the bile into the gut. Now, the gut bacteria, if you have a dysbiosis, like an overgrowth of certain bacteria that produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, that beta-glucuronidase can come in and cut off that anchor that was supposed to keep the estrogen from coming back into your body. And now, free of that anchor, the estrogen can flow back into your body, and this causes a syndrome that many women have probably heard of called estrogen dominance, which is characterized by a lot of uncomfortable symptoms that a woman would register as just feeling like my hormones are out of balance.
So here we can see that gut function directly impacts thyroid function through the action of the microbiome. The other impact of having poor gut health when it comes to thyroid is that there are strong links between both the health of the microbiome and intestinal permeability when it comes to the development of autoimmune thyroiditis, that is Hashimoto's and Graves' disease.
If you're curious about your hormonal health, take our quiz. You'll get a report with insights into some key areas you need to look at when it comes to getting your hormones in alignment, as well as some handy tips to get you started. Go to theshiftclinic.com/links.
It's estimated that in the United States alone, there's 50 million Americans have an autoimmune disease, and about 250 million people around the world have an autoimmune disease. And that's just the diagnosable estimated cases. There are millions more on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum. That when someone's diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, it's about 4 to 10 years prior to that diagnosis of that autoimmune condition is when things were brewing on this inflammation spectrum. So, for example, then things like MS, things like celiac disease, things like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, things like Hashimoto's disease or autoimmune thyroid issues. There's over 100 different autoimmune diseases that mainstream medicine recognizes as an autoimmune condition today, and a 40 above that 100 that at least have an autoimmune component to it, meaning that there's aspects of its pathophysiology that are autoimmune in nature. The most common autoimmune disease known today is Hashimoto's disease, or autoimmune thyroid problems, when the immune system attacks the thyroid. It's the first ever discovered in science as an autoimmune disease in the early 20th century, I believe. But it's not only the first discovered, it's also the most common. But other common ones are things like lupus, Sjogren's disease. I mentioned ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, celiac disease, MS, things like this. So we have our genetics, which haven't changed in 10,000 years. But yeah, our world has changed very dramatically in a very short period of time. So researchers are exploring this genetic, epigenetic, this DNA, lifestyle, DNA, environment mismatch that has grown very, very, very mismatched. So our food supply, the depletion of soil, the environmental toxins, chronic stress, all of these things are this perfect storm that can awaken the genetic predispositions that, again, haven't changed in 10,000 years. They were lying dormant, but they're being awoken like never before because of this onslaught of environmental epigenetic triggers. That's what I'm seeing. And it looks so different for so many different people because of so many different manifestations of autoimmunity.
That was Dr. Will Cole. Dr. Cole is an integrative doctor and author from New York City. I love his holistic approach and also the way that he integrates mind-body principles into his work. You'll hear more from him as we move through the series.
So within the United States, it's estimated about 27 million Americans have thyroid disease, and half of them don't even know it. The majority of which are women. Women are affected by hypothyroidism and autoimmune thyroid disease at a much greater rate than men. So with that, it's important to understand a few things. One is, we used to think that thyroid conditions predominantly just affected older people. So we thought, oh, okay, it's like a geriatric condition. Then we started seeing it more in women in their 30s getting diagnosed. And now we're seeing, I've diagnosed it in 8-year-olds. Now, thyroid is so crucial. Every single cell in your body has receptors for thyroid hormone. And so you can't live without it. And this is always the one where when people say, well, I don't want to be on a medication, I don't like pharmaceuticals. You cannot live without thyroid hormone. It is incompatible with life to be hypothyroid. So, and I'm hypothyroid. I take a medication every day. I will tell you firsthand, it is not living what is happening while you are hypothyroid. So with thyroid disease, we see manifestation in so many different systems, and that is because it affects every single system. This is how hormones work. There are little chemical messengers going out, orchestrating everything going on in your body. So there's two main thyroid conditions, hyperthyroid and hypothyroidism. Hyperthyroid is driven by Graves' disease, which is where antibodies actually dock onto your thyroid, stimulate it, then it releases thyroid hormone. That is more rare than Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune hypothyroidism. So it's important to understand that within developed nations, the number one cause of hypothyroidism is autoimmune. Although for a long time we were like, it's because we don't have iodine, not so much in a developed nation. So understand that with Hashimoto's, this is where antibodies actually flag the thyroid for destruction. They don't actually do the destroying. So I grew up in the mountains, so I think about that when they flag trees to be cut down, and there's the guy who goes out and he puts the big orange X on the tree. He flagged it, but he's not the one that's going to cut it down. The other guy with the equipment comes in and cuts the tree down, and that's the immune system. So in Graves', we're going to stimulate with an antibody. That's going to lead to the symptoms. In Hashimoto's, we're going to tag, flag, and then the T cells are going to come in and destroy. Now, why this is important to understand is that antibodies can show up, and we see this in multiple autoimmune conditions, but along with Hashimoto's as well, up to a decade before you have symptoms. So it's so important that every woman has antibody screening as part of her annual exam, along with a full thyroid panel. And so these antibodies can show up. Then what happens next is that we start to get these weird symptoms. So with hypothyroidism, can show up in some weird symptoms. So your thyroid is responsible for your motility in your gut, your menses, your mood, your metabolism. So those are some big areas where people are like, yeah, so if you're hypothyroid, you're going to gain weight, you won't poop, you have dry skin, you can lose the lateral third of your eyebrows, you can have hair loss going on, but you can also have heartburn. that could be a symptom of hypothyroidism because thyroid stimulates the parietal cells that release hydrochloric acid in the stomach. And if you have that issue, you're going to have a whole lot of downstream issues in your gut, which I'm going to say, go back and listen to season 1 of The Shift so that you get caught up on that. But it also can manifest as changes in your voice. So your voice can become gravelly and deeper. We can also see that, yes, there's joint pain and fatigue, but it might be subtle that when you wake up in the morning and you step out of bed, your feet are incredibly painful, your hands are incredibly painful, and you haven't done anything. So, other ways that hypothyroidism can show up big time for women is an infertility and also amenorrhea or irregular periods. So loss of your period or irregular periods. Now, the reason for this, what the hypothesis is that the same mechanism in the brain that causes thyroid stimulating hormone to go up, TSH, what your brain says to your thyroid, also causes prolactin to elevate as well, which is great if you're feeding a baby, but not so great if you want to make a baby. And so we see this very intimate connection between thyroid hormone and the reproductive system. And, up until recently, it was actually recommended that if you had a TSH of 2.5 or higher and you're trying to conceive, thyroid medication should be initiated. Now the guidelines have shifted a little bit within the United States. Globally, we're still seeing many countries are like, we need to give thyroid medication. And that's because, one, elevated TPO antibodies or elevated TSH is associated with increased risk of miscarriage. But we've also come to understand that if we don't have adequate T4 is what your thyroid primarily makes. It's inactive, but it crosses the placenta. And if we don't have adequate T4, especially in the first trimester of pregnancy, that can impact babies' cognitive development and motor skills. There's actually a study where they tracked a cohort. They didn't induce hypothyroidism in women. They just measured and tested and saw where her T4 was. And they observed that that cohort, even up to 16 years of age, was significantly behind people their same age, because their mom didn't have adequate thyroid hormone. So baby's going to depend on that until you get into the second trimester, which is why we also have to screen early on in pregnancy. HCG, beta HCG that we test, that's the P stick, everybody. That's a weak stimulator of the thyroid. That's also trying to recruit thyroid hormone for baby as well. So, with fertility, we've got the connection with thyroid health. Even if you don't want to have a baby, you still care about your thyroid health because it's going to be like everything in terms of like getting up out of bed and like having great hair and great skin. Who doesn't want that? But in addition to that, you can see irregular periods. And this is what drives me nuts is when, I've had doctors say to me, when I'm like, why'd you put her on the pill and you didn't test her thyroid first? And they're like, thyroid disease is so rare. I'm like, who told you that? Like, where'd you get that information from? No, it's not that rare. And, something women should also be aware of is that when you have a baby, that can actually trigger an autoimmune condition. And 1 in 12 women worldwide develop postpartum thyroiditis, which is been thought to be a transient hypothyroidism, a transient autoimmune condition. However, about 50% of women will go on to develop hypothyroidism with subsequent pregnancies. So this is autoimmunity, right? You can't cure it, but you can put it into remission. And so this is something that takes place is like you have a baby, you can trigger the autoimmunity, and at 12 months postpartum, you may very well go back into remission. And then another triggering event, like having a baby, could bring it back up.
That was Dr. Jolene Brighton, a naturopathic doctor and women's health specialist. With any type of thyroid investigation, it pays to get your thyroid antibodies tested as well. Your thyroid antibodies are thyroid peroxidase and thyroglobulin. You need both of them to keep your thyroid healthy, but when they are too high, they begin to damage your thyroid tissue, leading to Hashimoto's disease. In Hashimoto's disease, the antibodies damage the thyroid to such an extent that they can no longer make hormones. The issue is that once you get diagnosed, your doctor will usually put you on thyroxine and may never look at your antibodies again. While thyroxine and other thyroid medications may help to bolster your thyroid hormones, they don't address the underlying issue which lies with the immune system. At Shift, our naturopaths like to test your antibodies even when your thyroid panel is normal. What we know is that antibodies will increase long before the thyroid dysfunction occurs. By doing some routine screening, we can see changes in the immune system that may indicate the path that you're heading down so that we can intervene early to stop it. The question that you're probably wanting to ask if you have Hashimoto's is, can my thyroid antibodies be reduced? The answer depends on a lot of factors, but at Shift we certainly have seen this happening hundreds of times with the right support. From a medical point of view, it is said that nothing you can do can impact your antibody levels. There are, however, many studies on herbal medicines, nutrients, and dietary changes that can influence your antibodies in a very positive way. We have seen many people with the right support bring their Hashimoto's into remission. It is important to note that most autoimmune conditions that resolve are in remission, meaning that if the conditions are right, that they will recur again. We know, for example, that eating a gluten-free diet can reduce antibodies. We know that consuming selenium can have a positive impact too. And there are many herbal medicines that research has shown to have a positive impact in this area. As always with The Shift, I want to ensure that you're under the care of your healthcare practitioner and getting individual advice when you want to heal holistically. The point is to understand that there are many options beyond thyroxine, and that the thyroxine still needs the right factors available in order to make it work for you. To convert T4 or thyroxine into T3, you need to have adequate levels of zinc and selenium. By ensuring that you're eating enough or perhaps even supplementing with these nutrients, you can help the conversion of your thyroid hormones. Other nutrients involved in thyroid hormone production and function are iron, vitamin D, vitamin A, and iodine. When it comes to the thyroid, most of the compounding factors are not looked at or addressed. It is no wonder that so many people are unable to make their shift, as they don't have all of the information to help their body to heal. What is important to understand is that thyroid malfunction is a secondary issue, and we need to look outside of the actual thyroid gland to find the root cause of the problem. We spoke extensively about hormonal birth control in episode 4 of The Shift. But here's Dr. Jolene Brighton again, talking about the link between oral contraceptive use and thyroid dysfunction.
So while you're on hormonal birth control, it leads to an increase in binding proteins, sex hormone binding globulin, thyroid binding globulin, cortisol binding globulin. This is not your body betraying you. This is your body saying, girl, that's a lot of hormones. Let's bind up some of those. And so with that, if you look in a nursing drug handbook, for example, you will find in there, it says lab changes that can happen. Increase in thyroid binding globulin, increase in total thyroid hormones. If you increase total thyroid hormones, you're going to decrease free thyroid hormones. Now we've got hypothyroidism that happens in some women because of the binding proteins. Not because your thyroid is misbehaving, but because your body is adapting. That's what it does. I mean, if you don't have some of these nutrients like selenium and those are becoming deficient, then your thyroid's not going to be able to do its job either.
Your thyroid is part of your endocrine system, and as we explored in episode 2 of this season, this means that you're going to see an impact across other endocrine organs as a result of the imbalance. Here's what Alyssa Vitti had to say about thyroid dysfunction and your hormones.
I mean, it's part of the endocrine system, right? So, if your thyroid is dysfunctional, if it's sluggish, that we know can affect your cycle, your ovulation, like I said, can affect your metabolism. It can affect, how your body's responding to sugar and using stored fat as energy. It can affect your adrenals. That's what I mean. The endocrine system is a concert of organs and glands, the pituitary, the thyroid, the adrenals, the ovaries, and they work together synergistically. So to isolate one, it's an interesting and useful frame, but it's really about what is the deeper issue at play, and why is it that 47% of women are struggling with hormonal issues and, men are not suffering at this rate. What is really the deepest issue? It's not thyroid. It's not this symptom. It's not PCOS. These are just the symptoms of the deeper problem. How are we getting there in the first place? And it turns out that what we're doing is that we don't know about an important biological clock called the infradian rhythm, which is unique to women. And we are disrupting it. And because it affects major systems of the body, like your brain, like your metabolism, like your immune system, your stress response system, and your reproductive system, if you disrupt it by eating and exercising and doing your self-care in ways that ignore your biological rhythm and your hormonal reality, you can put all of those systems at risk for developing problems. We have to ask that deeper question of how do we support this core piece of how we function.
Reviews help us know that we're hitting the mark with what you need and help us to shape future seasons. I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few moments to leave us a review. I would love to know what you think. If allopathic doctors only have thyroxine to treat thyroid complaints, then you need to be thinking about other ways for you to support the factors that may be relevant for you. The first step is seeing someone to help. A naturopath or integrative physician that understands the complexity of the endocrine system and how to assess your whole thyroid health picture. From there, your supportive treatment options include diet and lifestyle changes, herbal medicines, nutritional supplementation, acupuncture, emotional wellness therapy, and perhaps even wellness retreats. One of the things that I've been exploring for years is the pushback from modern medical doctors in the use of complementary or alternative therapies. This can range from your doctor being mildly displeased with you pursuing natural remedies to them telling you that they will not be effective, usually with no knowledge of what you are taking or why. As you've been listening to The Shift, you've heard from many doctors that started off in the mainstream model and chose to take a different path. One of these is Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury, who is a traditionally trained neurologist that has been on a journey of rediscovering her Indian roots and the power of Ayurvedic medicine. Dr. Chowdhury is in the unique position of being the first Western medical doctor to be able to examine the Siddha texts, which are ancient medical texts from India that are over 8,000 years old. You'll hear more about this in her episode of the Expert series. Here we discussed why it is difficult for mainstream medicine to accept that there are other forms of medicine out there and if she can see this changing.
I think it's on multiple levels. I think on the individual level as a physician, as I described my own experience, it does require a weakening of your own ego to have gone through such a rigorous training. I remember the 36 hours of no sleep deprivation. And there is this real feeling of like only the strong, can survive this. And it's gotten better since I graduated. I think you can only work for 24 hours now, which is a huge improvement. But I think, you go through this experience that does build your individual ego, that you know it all, you are the best. And then to come out of that and be like, well, no, not really. These guys kind of, had figured this out a long time ago. So I think that's there on the individual level. But I think that is actually an obstacle that's pretty easy to overcome. I think especially now with just the degree of doctor burnout there is, and as younger doctors are coming out, they're much more amenable to the mind-body connection. I think that there's just been a cultural shift. I think the very, very big challenge is both the financial and legal structure that has been set up within the medical field. And, this is not just here in the US, but in all over the world. Even in India, I was really, really surprised at how much influence modern medicine had over the ancient traditions. And when you have a structure like that, that is that powerful and has such a strong influence on our education, and has such a strong influence in terms of reimbursement. For example, let's say as a physician, I wanted to teach patients, meditation or do something with sound healing. I don't have a code that correlates with that, so I can't get paid for that. Healing Touch, which is a form of energy healing, finally got hospital codes because of all the studies done around it. And when it got hospital codes, then it was finally introduced into the hospital system. So you have this bigger machine that requires things to be coded in a certain way and is set up for profit through prescription, and that people need to have a certain level of illness for the machine itself to even be fueled financially. That's a much bigger obstacle to overcome. But again, the, good thing about being young is our medical system is very young and it's not very good. And so it can't last for very long because people in it continue to get sicker. And you can't have a medical system where people just continue to get sicker. It will eventually break down. So the internal transformation for physicians, I think, is just happening from one generation to the next. And just as physicians themselves are starting to eat healthier, do meditation practices, just like my own experience really dictated the kind of physician I became. And so I think that just happens as consciousness shifts in general, kind of like the 100 monkey story, that when a certain number of people start to believe and think in a new thought, it starts to become more widespread. The bigger challenge for us is just overcoming the financial initiatives that are in place for not healing people of chronic illness.
We spoke a lot about the dysfunction in the health industry in episode 11 of The Shift Season 1. I'd encourage you to go back and take a listen if you haven't yet. Thyroid disease is a great example of the Western medical system being limited in what they can deliver. Once you're diagnosed with hypothyroidism, you're prescribed thyroid medication, but there's no plan to get you off of it. This is especially concerning when the thyroid issue is caused by something else. And if the original issue was rectified, you wouldn't need to be on meds for the rest of your life. Let's talk about one more thing when it comes to thyroid, and that is the impact of calorie restriction and overexercise on the thyroid gland. One of the causes of low thyroid hormone production is excessive exercise and undereating. I see this a lot in women who are doing high-intensity training like CrossFit or are restricting their calories. Let's hear from Dr. Lara Bryden on this one.
Yes, there's definitely been an uptick in women not eating enough to fuel their hormonal system. So women can be active, they can exercise, but they just need to know they need to eat way more to keep up with that. And one of the things that happens with female athletes is that, unfortunately, our appetite doesn't always tell us how much food we need. I think, exercise itself can be a bit of an appetite suppressant. So for anyone who's exercising or, training strongly, regularly, you really need to get down and do some calculations or get a dietitian or nutritionist or a naturopath to help you do those calculations of how many calories you're going to need to keep up with that. And your period can be a handy gauge because ovulation will be the first thing to switch off, and more likely to happen with younger women who have a less mature menstrual cycle. Older women can sometimes get away with exercising a bit more, eating a bit less and still holding on to their menstrual cycle.
There was a lot of technical information in this episode. If you want to explore your thyroid further, I'd recommend checking out my masterclass, which is available at theshiftclinic.com, where I present the information in this episode with images to help you get a grasp of things more easily. In the next episode of The Shift, we're going to explore weight loss. We're going to look at why we gain weight and why it can be such a challenge for us as women to lose it.
Coming up on The Shift.
Most people think they have to lose weight to be healthy, when my experience is the opposite. You've actually got to be healthy to lose weight.
30% of a modern person's calories come after 8 p.m.
You can't hang your hat on one thing and say, well, that's the magic bullet.
When they are gaining weight in the middle because they're stressed, what that means is that their body is actually inflamed.
So ultimately, for most people, we would see the weight loss resistance or the weight gain as a symptom of something bigger.
This series is a production of The Shift Clinic. Hosted by Katherine Maslen. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com.
We can be. We must be.
The first generation to end extreme poverty.
The generation most determined to fight injustice
and inequality.
The generation that saves the planet
from climate change.
And this is how we will get it done.
The global goals. A 15-year plan for everyone, everywhere.
With no one left behind.
The global goals are a framework. that collectively help us
support the health of our people
and the planet.
At Shift, we are ambassadors for the global goals.
This project supports global goal number 6.
Clean water and sanitation.
Every time you listen
to an episode of The Shift,
we provide a day's access to clean water
for a human in need
in Malawi, Africa.
Water is the foundation to health, and we believe
every human should have access
to clean, healthy water.
So please share this podcast wide
and keep tuning in
so we can impact those who need it the most.